150 playlist tracks, 4,844 playlist clips, 66 mixer tracks, and 167 automations is what creates my latest track called Not a Pleasure that you're hearing in the background right now. And if you're wondering how all of that was made, well, we're here for that. So let's take a look at the project. Okay, so we are inside the project. This is everything that creates the track, all of these elements, everything. But first, before going into every single one of the elements, let's try to understand the arrangement. So this is the intro that you only find in the extended mix and not in the original mix. After the intro ends, the actual track starts here. It starts really simple in the first break with just a kick, the bass, the vocal, and a couple of effects in the background. It then goes on into a really simple build-up. And then everything stops here, where we go into complete silence. Then the vocal come back. And the first section of the job starts. It starts really simple with basically just a kick and the bass. We then have the second section of the job with all the percussion and all the other elements. And the intention here, my idea was, let's make it so that people think that this is the highest point of energy in the tracks with a couple of the percussion, a lot of effects. But actually, this is of course the second part of the job, but it's also like second build-up. So we build energy, we build tension all the way to this point. All the way here, where all the tension and all the energy is released into the third section of the job, which is actually at the highest point of energy in the job. We then go into a little transition, and then we have the second break, which is a longer and a little different version of the first break with different effects and a couple more instruments. We then continue with the second build-up. We then have the second pre-job, which is different from the first one, and the second job, which is of course similar to the first job, but with a couple of variations in the arrangement, also in the effects, and a couple of different automation and things like that. Okay, now that we took a look at the arrangement of the track, let's take a look at what actually makes the track. The project is divided into different sections. Here we have the vocals, here we have the kick, we then have all the synth elements. And we have percussions and effects. I used a lot of effects in this track. Okay, so let's try to go through in the exact order that I went through when I was creating the track. So the first thing I did was trying to find the vocal, and I found this really cool vocal sample that you hear all throughout the track. And the first idea that I had, I said, okay, I want this vocal repeating itself for 4 times, and then I want a really sort of underground drop with just a kick and the bass to start after that. So that's exactly what I did. I had this vocal with the delay on the latest word. Right, I placed a kick. And then I started with the bass. I tried to find what notes the vocal was playing because I wanted to overlay the vocal in the job. I wanted to have both the vocal and the bass playing at the same time. So I find out that these were the notes that the vocal was playing. And then I tried to make a bass sound in Serum. I ended up with this bass sound right here. It's a really simple bass. It sounds like this. It's really simple, but also really powerful. So together with the kick, it sounds like this. Just a couple of automation here to make it a little more interesting. At this point, I had my 3 main elements, the kick, the bass, and the vocal. So I was ready to try to make a job. I started trying a lot of different things. I tried to change the melody. I tried to make variation to the melody, but I really liked the rhythm that this really, really simple melody was creating. I didn't want to change the melody, but how I can keep a 1 minute drop interesting with just these simple notes. What it came out to my mind was, okay, let's say that instead of having just one bass sound, what if I have two bass sounds? And maybe in a section I have the first bass in the foreground and the other bass in the background, and in another section I have the second bass in the foreground and the first bass in the background. Or maybe in another section they're both playing at the same time, but one is more pushed into the higher frequencies and the other one covers the lower frequencies, and all things like that. That's exactly what I did. I added this other bass with a lot of automation. As you can see, I automated a macro in Serum, which is linked to a couple of parameters. I had the decay of the envelope 1 in Serum. I also had some distortion. I automated, of course, the volume, an high pass filter, a low pass filter, and a couple of different things like an EQ and a couple of other. So in the first section, it sounds like this. But in the second section, it sounds different. And the same thing in the third section. The problem is that that wasn't enough. I already tried to change the melody, but I wasn't happy with that. So what it came to my mind was, okay, let's try to add another bass sound. And I think that I was missing something more in the top end. So I thought, okay, what if I add a 303 style bass? And in FL Studio, there's this really cool plugin called Transistor Bass, which is an emulation of the TB303. And I used that to create this sound right here. I had to render it at some point. I don't remember exactly why. It sounds like this. A really aggressive acid sound. I really like the sound of it. So now what I had was, of course, the kick, and not one, not two, but three different basses. They were playing exactly the same notes throughout all the job, but thanks to automation, they were interacting between each other. So the bass now evolves during the job. It's never the same. If you're wondering what are all these other bass sounds right here, basically all of these are different layers of the main bass, and each one of them has a different purpose. So for example, one of them was to add some stereo information, especially in the higher frequencies. Another one goes from left to right. One of these is to add some top end. And yeah, that's what all of these are. They're really pushed in the background in the mix. They really help to fix a couple of the problems that I had with the other basses. So let's try to take a listen at the entire bass section. It sounds like this. Second section. And then the third section. Okay, that's basically everything that we can say about this bass sound. Let's move on and let's take a look at the percussions. Let's start with the claps. I used the two different samples to create the clap sound I wanted. I also added the third clap sound, which is pushed a lot in the background and has quite a bit of reverb on it. This is something that I often do to just create a little bit of variation in the claps. So clap sounds like this. We then have a standard crash. It has a pretty long tail. Then we have the hi-hats. And here I did something similar that I did with the bass sounds, where I don't have just one hi-hat, I have three different ones, and thanks to volume automation, I have a section where one is more in the foreground and the other one are in the background, and another section where the other one are in the foreground and this other one is in the background. It's similar to what I did with the bass. So, for example, in this section, the hi-hat sounds like this, but in this other section, they sound completely different, basically. That, of course, is to create variation in the track. We then added some other little closed hi-hats. I placed them off-grid. We also have some hi-hat rolls. That sounds like this. And then in the second part of the job, I also added some rides and some extra percussions. That sounds like this. I also added some tom sounds. And others random little percussion here and there, like this one we have a reverse crash. So let's take a look at all the percussions together. Everything together sounds like this. So in the first section, we have a lot of things going on. In the second section, quite a bit more things going on. And in the third section, we have the full drums. Let's take a listen also with the kick. Okay, so that's everything regarding drums. Let's now take a look at the effects section. So first we have, of course, some effects that are just in the background, like these and these one. They're just used to create some ambience in the first part of the job, especially since it was really that basic with just the kick and the bass. I just added some effects to create some ambience in the background. I also used this glitch sound and these effects to make the first part a little more interesting, because there wasn't anything happening in the first 8 bars, so I added these just to introduce some new elements to keep the listener interested in what's going on. But then effects play a really big role in the second part of the job, which is right here. As you can see, there are a lot of effects here. These is what are used to create that tension, to build up the energy again for the third job, which is the highest point of energy in the track. Especially these one and also these two really help a lot in creating that effect. As you can hear, they're really creating a lot of energy, and then all the energy is then released in this third section right here, as you can hear. Also in especially these effects right here and these two right here, I kept their volume high when I did the mix, because yeah, they were really important. Usually I don't keep the effects as high as I did in this case for these ones, but they play a really important role. Basically that's it. We have some other ambience things that are allowed in the background just to fill the gaps a little bit more. But yeah, that's basically it for the job. Now let's move into the breaks section. The break, as I told you, is really simple. It's just a kick. I used the same sample that I used in the job, but I made it a lot shorter. So from here, it's a lot shorter, so it has a lot less energy. I then used the same exact instrument that I used for the job to create this bass sound, and exactly the same notes, but I routed to a completely different mixer track, so I mixed it differently. I cut out a lot of the lower frequencies, because I want most of the lower frequencies to be present in the job and not in the break, because otherwise the job wouldn't feel as powerful. So I just use an high pass filter to cut them all out. I then re-added in the mix some of the lower frequencies with this instrument right here and also this instrument right here, just because it was lacking a bit in the lower frequencies, and that's of course because I filtered them all out from this instrument. I used some other instruments to add them back in the mix, because I wanted to have a little more control. I didn't want for them to be as powerful as the one that are in the job. That's why I used some different instruments, so that I could add them in a different way, in a less powerful way. I also have this really simple reed bass. So yeah, we have the kick, we have these bass sounds right here, of course the vocal. As you can hear, and we have some percussions. I used the same percussion that I used in the job, but again, thanks to automation, I made the sound a little bit different. This is how it sounds with the percussion I used. But as you can hear, it doesn't sound finished. It's missing something. And that again, I fixed that by adding quite a bit of effects that play again a big role. So let's try to take a listen. As you can hear, there we have quite a bit of effects. Let's just take a listen at everything without the effects. Sure, it sounds good, but it's pretty empty. But with all of these effects, it sounds like this. Now we have an ambience where all the other instruments leave. So yeah, that's in my opinion a lot more complete. It doesn't sound that empty. We then go into the build-up. It's again a really simple build-up. It's similar to the first section, but I added some drums like the claps right here. Again, the same one from the drop. some more effects. And something that is missing from this build-up, if you noticed, there are no snare rolls, the classic snare roll I had in a previous version of the track, but I then tried to take them out of the mix and it didn't feel they were necessary. So instead I added this really simple crash fill. It sounds really simple. But yeah, I found that that was enough to build the energy in the build-up, so that's what I ended up using, and I took out the classic snare roll. And yeah, that's basically it for the build-up. We then go into this section where everything comes to a stop. I wanted to go to a section where it was only silence, for then the vocal to come back in. And of course go into the drop. What creates this effect is a delay on the last word and then a tape stop effect. I used this really simple plugin called the D-Blue tape stop with this low down parameter all the way to 0.01, and then I automated the trigger so that it creates this sound right here. It creates this really cool tape stop effect that I really like. Of course, I placed the tape stop after the delay, otherwise the effect wouldn't work. And then yeah, we have basically nothing here, just the crash sound, a couple of effects that are in the background. And then we have the vocals that's repeating itself 4 times. And we go into the first drop. The second break instead, which is this section right here, it's a variation of the first break. It's just basically the first break, but a little longer. And I also added this other instrument, the Trio 3 style bass that I have playing in the drop. I also placed it here because I thought it sounded really interesting and it creates some difference between the first break and the second break. Also, I did some variation with the effects section. I added some effects, I removed a couple of them. We then go into the second build, which is really similar to the first one, again with this other sound added. And then we have another sort of stop, which is different and shorter than the first one. It's not the same as the first one because the idea in the first one was, okay, we go to complete silence and then I wanted something unexpected to happen. That's why I had this vocal and that goes into the drop. But when the listener comes to the second part of the track, it already listened to this, so it didn't really make sense to have another unexpected moment because it would have been expected. So that's why I decided to keep it a little shorter, only 4 bars instead of 6. And I did something different. I have the vocal that's going from left to right. Yeah, we then go into the second drop, which is a little shorter and with some variation. For example, I decided to rewrite a lot of the automation so that it sounded similar with the same instruments, but it had some difference. Also, I made some changes to the arrangement so that it was a little shorter. So that's why we have the percussion that come in after just 4 bars instead of 8 bars. Okay, and then we have this section, which is similar to the second section of the first drop, that goes into the third section right here, which is again the highest point of energy of the second drop. We then go into a transition, exactly like the first drop. I decided to add these 2 transitions both in the first drop and in the second drop at a later point, just because the third part of the drop, this part right here and this part right here, were the highest point of energy in the track, and the following section, so this one but also this one, were the lowest point of energy in the entire track. I decided to add a little section that acted as a little transition between this section. That it sounds like this. And then we have a simple outro with just the percussion and effects, just to keep it a little interesting. The intro is just a really simple intro because I try to keep in mind two things when I'm producing an intro. The first one is it's only present in the versions that are used by DJs, so there shouldn't be a lot of things going on that makes it hard to mix into or out of. So yeah, what I try to do, I try to think, okay, if I was about to mix this track in, what would I want to have and what I wouldn't want to have? And the second thing I try to keep in mind is, of course, the intro is there to present the track, so I try to use a couple of the elements that will be present later in the track, and I try to introduce them one by one. So we start with a simple kick and a filtered bass. We then go into this other section where there's a little bit of the vocals, but really pushed in the background. And then the third section, it sounds like similar to what the drop will sound, but with a lot less energy. It's not as high energy as the drop will be, as you can hear right here. There's quite a bit different in energy levels. But of course, people, when they will hear it, they will have sort of an understanding of what's about to come. And that's how I approached the production of this intro. And that's basically everything. That's the track. We took a look at basically everything. Again, this is only the production project. The mixer was done in a completely different project. That's why it sounded a little different than the final master, which I have right here. Of course, make sure to check out the track. The links are in the description, and let me know in the comment if maybe I should do in the future other videos like this one where I go a little bit deeper into how my tracks are made. And also, if you have any kind of question regarding the sounds I use, the sound design, the samples, the plugins, please let me know in the comment. I will try to answer all the questions that you might have. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.